So the next up is going to be Dr. Scott Foxhoven. He's actually an alumni, graduated a few months ago. So Dr. Foxhoven. Dr. Foxhoven is originally from a small town in northeast Nebraska called Wynot. He actually went to school at South Dakota State. I think it was cheaper to go to the University of Nebraska, and then came here. So I will tell you a little story about Scott. When he got his master's in the crop phys lab as well, and I was trying to convince him to stay another 3 years and get a PhD. And you know, at that age, 3 years is a lifetime. It's not really, I'll tell you. But I'm trying to convince him to get a PhD. And you know, logically he says, why? And I said, why not? That's it. So happy to introduce Dr. Scott Foxhoven. He's going to play in the Fertilizer band for us today. Scott?
Thank you very much, Dr. Bilo. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. As he said, I'll be talking to you guys about banded fertility today. Now, I do have to give a shout out to Dr. Bilo. I was with him for 2 years of my master's degree and then 3 years for my PhD. I actually now work for the company called Mosaic. I work on their new product development team. I'm pretty excited because I do this type of research that I used to do at the University of Illinois. Now I get to do it kind of across the countryside. But I couldn't have the job that I have right now if it wasn't for Dr. Bilo and the University of Illinois really teaching me anything and everything from crop protection all the way up to fertility. Now, Dr. Bilo really wants to make sure you're a good agronomist by the time you leave this lab. But of all of the things that I learned, there is probably the most important thing that he taught me is what every single agronomist has to know before they go out into the workforce. And it took me a long time to figure out how to do this one skill. And I say, this is the most important thing you can ever learn in graduate school. And that is how to do the proper field pose. I don't know who snapped this photo, but I can tell you this is probably try number 582, because it took a while for me to get that valuable skill down. But really what we're going to be talking about today is banded fertility. That was some of the research that I got to do with Dr. Bilo's lab for my master's and my PhD. But really, the starting question is, what is banding? So for banding, you're really concentrating that nutrient near that crop's root zone. Now when you think about this banding practice, the first thing a lot of people think of is what you do during a typical strip till operation, where when you're going out there, you're putting down a tillage pass, you're actually putting nutrients right inside of that tillage pass, right in that narrow strip, and then you're planting directly over top of that fertilized band. Now, at the University of Illinois, we understand that it's kind of hard to separate out the fertilizer response of banding nutrients compared to, say, broadcasting them, and separating out the response of maybe the yield increase from tillage. Now, here in Dr. Bilo's lab, we have a really unique opportunity to be able to separate these out because we have a research banding toolbar. This is actually sitting right over there. This is a Montag Gen 2 fertilizer box mounted on top of a 4-row Dawn Coulter type toolbar. Now in our lab, what this allows us to do is I can take dry fertilizer and I can band it about 4 to 6 inches deep, and then I can plant directly over top of that fertilized band. All of the research I'm going to show you guys was done in the spring, maybe 24 hours before planting. Now with this system, you guys can see in the photo here, I'm in a full conventional tillage system. And when I'm looking at nitrogen-only control to broadcast P&K or banded P&K, I take this dry toolbar and I drag it through every single plot, even the nitrogen-only control where I'm not applying anything. So the research you're about to see today is going to be 100% just what happens when you put the nutrients out as a broadcast or a band. The tillage is going to be exactly the same for every single plot. And I'll repeat, this is all spring banded research. So now, why do we take a look at this type of research? Why are we going out there with a banding toolbar? It's not as easy maybe as broadcast, but the reason is because we have some pretty cool crop responses in the field. What you're looking at is the exact same hybrid, exact same planting population, and the exact same planting date. And believe it or not, it's actually even the exact same fertility program. If you guys read the title, you can probably guess what the difference between these two is. On my left side, I broadcasted 80 pounds of P2O5 and 60 pounds of K2O. On my right side, exact same amount of nutrients, but I put it directly underneath that crop row. Banded at 4 to 6 inches deep and planted directly over top of it. Now, you guys have seen a lot of marketing photos. You know a photo can be staged, right? You could see that banding response across an entire 6-acre study, anywhere and everywhere. And if you ever come to our lab around June 6th, maybe V6 to V8 corn, you will see this across the field where we have any sort of banding research almost every single year. And we also see that banding becomes really important when you have tougher conditions. In 2021, we got a little ambitious. We went out there and planted a crop on April 6th, and it didn't come out of the ground for 24 days. Okay, that's a long time for a corn seed to just sit in the ground. On the left side, that crop just had broadcast P and K. On the right side, exact same amount of nutrients. But those nutrients were right there near that seedling, right from the beginning of the year. Now, I want to point you guys' attention to something. Start to count how many leaves do you see on each one of those corn plants. If I count, I'm not too good at math, but if I count, I don't really ever see anything more than 4. It's about a V3 to a V4 crop. Now, the age-old myth is that that corn plant lives off the seed until at least V4, and that there's nothing you can do to change its yield trajectory until after it's done living off that seed. I can tell you right now, on this left side, even though I put down a spring application of P and K, that is going to have a lot more plants left behind compared to that crop on that right side. We know when it's getting wetter and harder to get in the field, having that crop get up and out of the ground quickly makes a big difference. Now let's take a look at the yields from this study. Okay, so my nitrogen-only control in this study was 203 bushels. This is a study pretty highly replicated. 10 hybrids, 6 reps for every single treatment, and we did it across 3 different populations. The nitrogen-only control was 203 bushels per acre. Now I put down that broadcast P and K application. I got a 17 bushel per acre yield increase. Okay, that's pretty respectable for a spring P and K application. But when I banded that fertility directly underneath the row, exact same amount of inputs, I could squeeze another 8 bushels out of that crop. Now, just a standard averaged over everything, 8 bushels isn't bad. But I wanted to look at my research and say, how does a planting population factor really affect response to fertility? Do you guys think planting population is going to affect how much fertility I need or just my response to fertility in general? You guys can probably guess. The answer is yes. So let's take that exact same data set, and I'm going to break it out by these 3 different populations. So 30,000, 36,000, 42,000 plants per acre. You can think of it as low, medium, and high. Okay, we're still averaging across the 10 hybrids about a 200 bushel per acre yield. At 30,000 plants per acre, there was absolutely no difference between broadcast and banding. I got 23 bushels either way. But when I went to 36,000 plants per acre, the story changed. Now I got a 9 bushel per acre advantage when I banded compared to broadcast. And as you guys can expect, when I went up to 42,000 plants per acre, that bumped up to 12 bushels per acre. Okay, so not only is this placement increasing with the higher population, I have better responses to banding at high populations. What really caught my eye though was the fact that the response to broadcast fertility was going down at higher populations. I have a lot more mouths to feed. How come they're not responding to that extra broadcast fertility? Well, what did Dr. Beeler talk to you guys about earlier this morning? What happens to that corn plant's root system as you're increasing the population? It gets a lot smaller. You think about a 30-inch row. This research is all done in a 30-inch row. If you have 42,000 plants per acre, that root system gets pretty small. Do you expect that really small root system to go out and explore 15 inches into the center of the row to grab some of that broadcast fertility that you put out there? No, especially when you go to higher populations. If you just broadcast the fertility, that corn plant just simply isn't going to have access to 100% of your application. So that's why you don't really see the higher yield response to broadcast fertility when you're at higher populations. If that root system is going to get smaller, you have to put that fertility where that root system is actually going to be at. Now, Dr. Bilo also talked to you guys about the negative relationship between yield components. So if I'll remind you here, the kernels per plant that we have, the more kernels per plant, we have a solid negative relationship between the weight of each individual kernel. Okay, so that data actually came from this study, and that was done on their nitrogen-only control. Okay, so I have all my different hybrids in here, 6 different replications. But what was really interesting, we looked and said, how do we break that negative relationship? We found that when we did the exact same treatments, but we had banded fertility, I could actually break that negative relationship. I mean, the best case scenario was to have it be a positive relationship. The more kernels per plant that I have, the heavier the kernels, but that's pretty dang hard to do. We, at minimum, were able to break that negative relationship. So even though I increased the number of kernels per plant, it didn't mean that they all immediately got smaller. So that's what we saw with the yield and the yield components. The next thing I want to talk to you about is also something Dr. Bilo mentioned, and that is stover. Okay, on this study, 30,000 to 42,000 plants per acre, this is my dry tons, short tons of stover, so 0% moisture, about 3.9 to 4.4 tons of stover production. And as you can imagine, when I added that broadcast PK, I increased my yield. I got an extra half a ton of stover. Now on top of that, when I banded that fertility, the increase in stover compared to the nitrogen-only control, I was basically doubling the production of the biomass of that plant compared to the response that I was getting with the broadcast application. So this means a couple things. So one, more yield is going to mean more stover. You guys have heard of this before. That means you're going to have to manage that stover. But what else is important about stover? Dr. Bilo kind of talks about it. Stover cannot be thought of as trash. It's especially when we're starting to think about the importance of carbon in our soils. Okay, I know that stover is carbon. There's a pretty good set of academic papers that have proved that stover has a certain percentage of carbon in it. And I'm not a mathematician, but if you do a couple calculations, 600 pounds of stover by today's standard of 1,000 pounds of CO2, 600 pounds of extra stover in your field is technically worth 1 carbon credit. Now, I don't think you can get paid for that carbon credit quite yet, but why do we care about carbon credits? We know that that stover is good. So if I can increase stover production, keep it in the field, but also manage it, there's also value to the increased stover production that you're going to have when you're increasing yield and you're doing more concentrated nutrient applications. So some key takeaways here. Banded fertility does have the possibility to increase yields without increasing inputs. Also, higher planting populations are going to demand better place fertility. And then lastly, stover is not trash. If you manage it properly, you can really get it to start working for you a little bit more. And I think Darby's going to be able to touch on this after the break. Now, I just showed you the banding was pretty good, right? Now, I do hear a couple common criticisms of pre-plant banding. And one of those is that a lot of people understand it provides superior season-long fertility, but the reality is we're a little bit nervous about time management, and some people think it's kind of an all or nothing approach. So I wanted to address this. We went back to the drawing board and we said, what else can we do to pair with banding? So I came up with a potential solution. And that potential solution is precision place or banded in-season nutrient applications. Now, if you guys have probably heard of something like this before, think about what that means. Where have you guys seen something that does that? Precision place in-season nutrient applications. Well, it's Y-drop. You guys have all heard of Y-drop before. I'm taking liquid fertilizer and I'm dribbling it right alongside the crop row in season. Now, I also know what you guys are thinking, because I've had the exact same problem. Liquid can kind of be a pain in the butt. There can be some problems with liquid fertilizer. Now, there's really good use cases for liquid, but I wanted to go after PK, sulfur, zinc, and boron. I wanted to find a way to put those nutrients in season. And as a graduate student, I found out that if I put all those letters together, they didn't like to play together. Okay, I had some salting out issues. And I also found out that if I tried to go with a liquid P&K program for 40 pounds of P2O5 and 30 pounds of K2O, it got a little spendy. So 1034O and potassium acetate in 2018 came out to about $87 per acre. You compared that to dry fertilizer, MAP and MOP, I think it was about $27 per acre. Okay, that was back in 2018. So I like the idea of doing liquid Y drop in season, but there's a couple things that I gotta watch out for. So maybe there's a new potential future of in-season banded nutrients. And that's what I'm gonna call dry drop. Now, what in the world is dry drop? That absolutely makes no sense. I've never heard of it before. Well, kind of think about liquid Y drop, dry fertilizer. You guys can probably guess what I'm going to show you. It's taking dry fertilizer and it's Y drop in it right alongside the crop row, just the way that you would do it with liquid. Okay? There's not a piece of equipment out there that can do that today. But it's really not that far off. You guys have ever seen this machine before? This is an air boom machine. They use it for VRT. They already make a machine that has the drop nozzles right on it. It's going to take a little bit of engineering, but all you have to do is install a vent on the bottom of that tube and include a Y apparatus. Okay? I really would not be surprised if 5 years in the future you have seen this in the field, because we've done a lot of testing with it and had some pretty good success. Now, the next question that people have asked me when I showed them this is, what about incorporation? We have dry fertilizer sitting on top of the soil surface. Is it going to get worked into the ground? If you're in Nevada and it never rained, probably won't get into the ground. But we found out that in most areas that have at least a little bit of water, you can rely on water incorporation. Okay, that corn plant's root system actually funnels water down to the base of the plant. And I would encourage you guys to go out to your fields today. If it's just got done raining, crop's taking up a lot of moisture, you will look in between the center two rows. You will see it's dry in the middle and it's wet right alongside that crop row. There's some research that has proven that a corn plant will funnel 40 to 50% of an inch rainfall down to the base of that plant. And it can actually even take a light rainfall or a misting. If it missed, you get 1/10 of an inch of rain. Go out to that field, the center of the rows will be bone dry, but you will have moisture at the base of that plant. So I'm going to rely on that rainfall funneling effect to really help me get that dry fertilizer and work it into that ground. So we did this study. We called it our 4R fertility study. I did this in 2020 and 2021. I took MAP and MOP and Micro Essentials SZ and Aspire from Mosaic's products. Compared those two. So my application rates were 80 pounds of P2O5 and 60 pounds of K2O. That's just the base P&K application. And then obviously when I had the Micro Essentials and the Aspire in there, I added 20 pounds of sulfur, a pound of zinc, and a half a pound of boron. And we took those two fertilizers, or two fertilizer combinations, and we put them out as a broadcast, as a pre-plant band, and then this new in-season dry Y drop, or dry drop. The dry drop application, we did it at V5. Okay? Now the 3 locations we did this at, 3 site years of data, was Southern Illinois in 2020 and 2021, and Central Illinois in 2021. Now if you look at the soil test, I'll just sum it up for you. We had pretty good phosphate levels. Our potassium levels were low. 100 or a little bit below. So we're definitely expecting a potassium response here. Now let's take a look right into the grain yield. All 3 of my site years here, 189 all the way up to 285 bushels per acre is my nitrogen only control. 180 pounds of nitrogen. 3 site average is 235 bushels per acre. On my left side, I have all my different fertilizer treatments. Up top here, we're going to be looking at each site year and the average. Okay, let's take a look at the broadcast responses. On average, the Micro Essentials SZ and Aspire had about a 6 bushel advantage over just the MAP and MOP. Okay, so 6 bushels here, you're obviously going to see it's going to vary a little bit from year to year, probably a little bit of that response to sulfur. Now let's take a look at the response to banding, okay? Very similar to what I showed you in the earlier years, I have a pretty good response to banding here. You will notice that I had one year where the aspire in the band, it seemed to be a little bit hot. I actually took it backwards a little bit. But just looking at the response of banding, exact same amount of nutrients. I took a broadcast pre-plant application of MAP and MOP on average, 9 bushels per acre, and I doubled it almost to 17 bushels per acre. Exact same amount of nutrients applied the exact same day. So the difference between concentrating it. Okay? And now, obviously, you can also see that we lost a little bit of yield here because of the 1 year where it went back a little bit. That's a concern. Sometimes when you're doing banding applications, you do have to be a little bit cautious on seed safety. Now let's take a look at this dry Y-drop application. Okay, never been done before. Here, you're going to see the first thing I think I noticed, that did not have a negative response. Okay, that banding application was a lot safer. But here, I have a 9 bushel per acre yield increase with dry Y-drop. Okay, even though I wasn't doing the pre-plant band, I had the exact same efficiency of pre-plant banding. But I got it done at a different time of year. Also, here, the MESZ and Aspire dry drop was the highest yield of the study. You start thinking about a systems approach. The standard MAP and MOP at 9 bushels per acre, just pre-plant and broadcast, all the way to 21 bushels per acre with Micro Essentials SE and Aspire dry Y-dropped at V5. Okay, and you look at just the yield efficiency of this study. Yield efficiency, I made up a number. I called it the bushels per acre yield increase that I could achieve per pound of P and K applied. Every single one of these was better than just MAP and MOP broadcast. But just looking at MAP and MOP, you can see that I am going to double the efficiency of those applied nutrients if I'm concentrating it near the row, whether it's a pre-plant banded application or this new idea of doing a dry Y-drop. Now the reality is that the pre-plant banding has great efficiency, but we said there's maybe a little concern on time efficiency. What happens if if I'm doing pre-plant banding, because I know it works, what happens if I don't get to those last acres? Okay, well that's where we find out that this dry Y-drop, it has some pretty good efficiency, and it had that wider application window, and we also noticed that it was a little bit safer. I had a little bit of the saltiness with the boron banded really close to the young seedling, but here, absolutely no problem whatsoever. So when I'm up at V5, I don't have to worry about salt issues near as much. I know some people, when they have banding, they're nervous that they're going to have a little saltiness or a little hot of a fertilizer mix up on the top of a hill. Here, I have absolutely no problem with that when I was doing the dry Y-drop. So guys, some key takeaways here. Banding is even more important when we're using those commodity fertilizers, MAP and MOP. We had a really good response to banding MAP and MOP. Now, a lot of that is just because the MESZ and Aspire did really good as a broadcast, so at some point you can only get so much out of a fertilizer application. Kind of the, what's it called? The diminishing return, okay? So the next one here, dry drop had similar fertilizer efficiency compared to pre-plant banding. That was really surprising for us. And then it also provided that greater timing flexibility, and it was a very safe fertilizer application. So the final takeaway, guys, here, plain and simple. Putting those nutrients next to that crop row where those plant roots could actually get to it, that was going to get you better crop nutrition and ultimately better yield.